Hello, everybody. How are you doing?
Hello,
Hi,
friends.
hi, Sonia. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, just lovely. It's so nice to be back with another Live with Love. I mean, under the circumstances, maybe not so great, but it's nice to be able to have these conversations again. Um, my name is Kevin. So out of practice. My name is Kevin, and I am the publicity chairman for Lakeshore's United Visionaries.
Mhm. And I'm Sonia Vasquez. I am the president and the chair of the Arts and Humanities Committee.
Yay!
Yep.
So, Sonia, want to just kind of tell us a little bit about what we're doing here today?
Sure. So, we were kind of, discussing as a board and committee that we wanted to just have a conversation around what happened at the Capitol. Some of the things, that people have been discussing back and forth, the comparisons, um, just kind of giving everybody a chance to hear, what we're thinking about, have a discussion with the audience, if anybody wants to comment and ask us any questions or, put in their own input, like that's totally welcomed. And just kind of have a discussion around this since it's such a major thing going on right now. So we're going to be discussing a few main topics. And we're going to start out with introducing Amanda Worley, and she will be talking about voting, the voting process, and the process of the ballot. Since this
There she
whole,
is.
there she is. So, so for some other, I just want to go through all the topics that we're going to be going through today. So just 1 second, and then we'll kind of more formally introduce you to Amanda. Um, but so because this all kind of started with voting, the voting process, claims of voter fraud, things like that, we wanted to bring Amanda on because of her expertise in working with the voting process and ballots. And then I will be talking about my experiences at protests for different social justice issues, um, such as Black Lives Matter. I've also protested for immigrant rights, and a few others. So I'm just going to be talking about my own experience and what those protests look like, and different things surrounding that. And then we'll bring in Olivia. She is going to be talking about some of the comparisons between the Black Lives Matter protest and what happened at the Capitol, and things that have been compared between the two of them, what that all kind of means, and the differences and similarities, I suppose. So um, we will get started with introducing Amanda, as she's going to give us some expertise on voting and ballots.
All right. Hi, I'm Amanda. Um, I guess I'll just start with my experiences. I worked for the August primaries. I worked at Central Count in City Hall. So that's where all of the um, absentee ballots were counted and processed. And that process was surprisingly intense. After that, I was approached to see if I would like to train to be a chief inspector, which basically is just like being in charge of a polling place. So that is something that I was training for during the presidential election in November. I worked under um, a wonderful woman, very insightful, who has been doing this for many, many, many pres- presidents. Um, and she kind of just showed me the ropes. Uh, the training was really long. There's a lot of information that you have to know. For example, this is the election day manual. You see, it's very, very thick. So the election process is actually on like a citizen side, not that complicated. They've made it surprisingly easy to register to vote. to request absentee mail-in ballots and to vote on election days. I'm going to go through kind of what I remember about the being able to process the absentee ballots at City Hall. The day starts at 7 a.m. All of the absentee ballots have been pre-sorted by their district and municipality. So we go through that and we make sure that all of the signatures match, that the witness signatures and address are there, that there's a clerk's signature on it to make sure that at least the outside of the ballot is legit. And then it goes to a different section where they're opened and handed to two poll workers that will be working the Badger book, which is basically like an electronic form of the poll books. So when you're a registered voter, you're already in the polling book. It would be like if you showed up to your polling place and they would find your name and you would sign saying that, hey, I'm here to vote, I'm casting my ballot. That's basically what we're doing. We're just signing you in, and we don't open the envelopes. We don't inspect the ballot. We basically, click in the Badger book system, find you as a registered voter, mark you off that you have submitted your ballot. And that also prevents people from being able to vote in person when they've already submitted an absentee ballot. We then, the Badger book gives the voter a number. We write that number on the outside of the envelope. And then the envelope and the ballots are separated. The ballots are sorted and laid out. And then we just look through to make sure that there aren't any write-ins. And then somebody takes that whole district worth of ballots and they run it through one or two tabulators that we had at City Hall. So all of the district absentee ballots are all run at once. After that, we take it out of the tabulator. It goes into a box. Everything is saved. So that goes as far as, if something is wrong with the ballot, we would remake it, but we'd save the original one. Like everything is accounted for. There are envelopes and boxes. The boxes get sealed, and then they're kept actually. So if anything were to come up, if we were in need of a recount, we could basically just rerun the election from start to finish because every single thing is kept. It's similar at the polling place, other than the fact that we are registering voters there. We had a lot of people that weren't registered yet. The registration process was incredibly easy because the state of Wisconsin has switched to an electronic system. So it's basically, you have to have the same proof of ID, proof of residence. It's very, very precise and laid out. Everything it's a well-oiled system. So the claims of voter fraud were really hard for me to even fathom because I just feel like it would be so hard to commit voter fraud. So very, very, very hard. As far as other state laws go, there are differences. And that's, I think, why we saw so many outcries of voter suppression versus voter fraud, because we don't want to prevent people from being able to vote. That's their right. But we also don't want people voting twice. We don't want people trying to rig the system in their favor. So I think even though that varies from state to state, the election process has been in place for so long. I think it would take a lot to be able to commit voter fraud. Not sure if anybody has any questions. There is a lot of information. So
I kind of have just a question from me because I've been following this journey with you for a while. What was like something that surprised you about the election process that you weren't aware of before?
I think the one thing that stands out for me is that I was just like taken aback when I was doing my training is the fact that in Wisconsin, felons can vote. It like if you say, okay, I have a felony, that means I can't vote for the rest of my life. In Wisconsin, as long as your sentence is served and you're not incarcerated on papers, you can still vote. You can still be a felon and cast your vote. So, I mean, we don't allow, for the most part in this country, felons to vote at all. But I feel like if people were to change their life around, they've served their sentence, they've, paid for their crime, so to speak, they should still have a say in who's our president and who is running the country. And I thought that was really cool because I was under the impression before that, like, if you're a felon, you're out for life. And that's just not true. So that was one thing that surprised me. There was a lot of tiny little details that I think I shared with you guys along the way where it's like, hey, did you know this? A lot of those are escaping me now because I feel like I'm a little on the spot, but.
Oopsie, you're doing great, Amanda. Do any of y'all have any other thoughts or questions to add? Oh, Sonia, you're muted.
My bad. Sorry. I don't think so necessarily for me. And I think, the thing that's been really interesting, I guess, to just comment is since I talk to Amanda nearly on a daily basis, but is seeing and hearing things from her about the process and as she learns, and she's sharing information with us as well. It just kind of struck me that, most average citizens just don't know the process that happens, on the other side. So I think it's really important and really interesting to be able to kind of give people some of that information from the other perspective of the vote and of the ballot. And I think in that way, people will maybe have a better understanding of just how it all works so that, if there is claims of voter fraud, we can kind of have the knowledge, the background knowledge, at least for our state, to be able to, kind of think more critically about it and be like, okay, well, was this really possible? Or, what is the route that somebody actually would have to take to make voter fraud happen? And as Amanda said, it seems like it would be pretty difficult. So,
right.
Yeah.
I did see that there was a question from the audience about being on extended supervision. That would be considered being on papers, being on probation. You'd have to fully complete your sentence. So you wouldn't be on probation for anything. You wouldn't have to check in with a PO, anything like that. So if you wanted to vote, if you have a parole officer with a felony offense, you are barred from casting a vote, unfortunately. So.
Any other questions for Amanda?
I was talking and then I realized that my mic was muted. Amanda, is there a resource that we can use to find out more information about ballots?
You were breaking up there. I'm sorry.
Oh, do you have a resource that we can use to find out more information about ballots?
So, of course, which I think we pretty much stress on in all of our meetings and stuff. The myvote.wisconsin.org is always a great resource for you to check out to make sure that your registration's up to date. Request absentee ballots, change your address, any of that, anything on that website, you're going to find it all there. But I also did come across another wonderful resource. Kevin, I think you have the link to it. I found this site today. It's the ballotpedia.org, and has everything that you could possibly want to know about elections, ballots, voting fraud, lawsuits, all of it. And it's updated daily. So you can actually go to the 2020 election, see all of the relevant cases that got brought to courts, and their status, what court was processing it, who was the people that were taking the case to court, and what they were taking the court case for. It does go into depth and explain exactly what those cases are about, which I think is super helpful for anybody really who's curious about exactly what this voter fraud is. The talk is about. It's completely unbiased, so it's just information. It's not, one side of the argument or the other. It's just facts, and the website is chock full of it. Yeah, it goes into depth about the differences in state election laws. All of it is really, really great resource. So if you're like me, who is like overwhelmed by paying attention to the news and trying to determine what news source is reliable and not skewed to one side or the other, and just generally can't keep up with everything that's happening because the news cycle is like 2 hours now. It's hard to keep track of everything. This website is updated every day, and it's a wonderful resource, I think.
I did have a quick question for you, Amanda. So I know that during the election, you brought up several times, like, hey, if you guys have any free time and you want to come help out, you can always come help out. What was it like volunteering, like as far as the amount of work compared to like the amount of people that were to do all of that work?
Well, to be fair, it wasn't completely volunteer work. I did get paid. It's not a lot, but I don't want you guys to think that I was doing it completely for free, because I wasn't. It was cool. It was really cool. I felt like it gave my life just a little bit more meaning, which I think is something that we are all kind of looking for in 2020. It was cool. Like, I did the voter registration, like the in-person, after the online and mail-in registration period was over. I actually worked at City Hall to register voters, and it was really cool. We did it the old-fashioned way, so we did it with the paperwork. But just, getting to see people, because there were a lot of people that were registering to vote for the first time, and you would think that those are, the people that are just turning 18 or, younger. But there were a lot of people who were middle-aged or older that were coming in to register to vote for the first time. They had never previously been registered anywhere. They had never voted before. And I just thought that was really cool. I think the best thing you can do to get involved is to start at the local level. That's where you're going to be able to make the most effective change. Local elections matter a lot more, and I think we're starting to see that. Then the presidential election. Like, yes, that's huge. Some people specifically only vote every 4 years for the presidential election, but the local elections are actually what determines a lot of what affects you as an individual person. So paying attention to that kind of thing is extremely important. And I feel like if you want to get involved, that's the place to start. Start asking questions, start paying attention to what's going on in your local municipalities. I think it's pretty eye-opening as to how deep of an effect you can have on your own community once you start getting involved in that.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Amanda.
Oh, you are welcome.
Yes. We love to see it. Just a reminder, if you have any questions or comments or thoughts that you want to share, please leave them in the comments. We'll get to them as we go. And we'd love to have this feel like a conversation, so feel free to talk with us, and we'd love to hear what you have to say as well, for those of you who are listening and watching.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
next up, I'm going to talk about a little bit about my experiences, just to kind of, I guess, sort of prepare for, Olivia is going to be talking about the comparisons between protests, BLM protests, and what happened at the Capitol. So I just kind of want to go over a little bit of what my own experience was and why, I guess what we'll be talking about and eventually is that, the differences, I guess. So the first thing up is I have been at protests. I don't know. I think my first one was like in 2000 and I don't know, sometime early 2000. I don't remember. To me, 2012. I'm not exactly sure. I so I have been going to protests for a long time. I've been to protests in Milwaukee. I've been to protests in Kenosha, Sheboygan. Been to protests in Manitowoc. So I guess I just want to say, because of a lot of the focus was on, bigger protests, I want to point out the difference also between bigger protests and smaller protests. So obviously, protests in Milwaukee, Kenosha, even when I was in Sheboygan, they were bigger, much bigger than like protests that we've had here. I think, generally here, we don't see as much of a turnout. There's just not as many people here. There's not as many people that maybe want to protest here, or that can. So I think, when officials such as, law enforcement and things like that hear that there's a protest happening, they generally, maybe are just going to like kind of watch to make sure that nothing bad happens. But because we generally don't have large protests, there usually isn't very large turnout of law enforcement, which is, obviously kind of understandable. But should something more happen, in any community, there's going to be a little bit more of an alert, and that's obviously kind of more understandable. But for example, in Milwaukee, Kenosha, Sheboygan, those are places where I have all protests for different things. So protests for Black Lives Matter, protests for immigrant rights, and other types of social justice issues. So in Milwaukee, and in Kenosha and Sheboygan, those are where I've seen the most police response or law enforcement response. There's often several police around the area of where we start to march and then where we end to march. So usually there's, a good amount of police kind of watching and making sure that something, nothing is happening. Kenosha was a kind of different story. I was in Kenosha. I think it was a week after the shooting happened by Kyle Rittenhouse. So I was in Kenosha. I marched with. It was pretty big march. It was extremely peaceful. It was just people walking, and then we got to our destination, and we had speakers and people talking, and then just kind of stuck around and talked to each other, things like that. And then we marched a little bit more after that. But around the I believe it's the courthouse in Kenosha, there were gates put up. And inside the gates, there were several, probably in maybe about 100 or so National Guard, and they were armed. So even for a protest where we were extremely peaceful, there were National Guard with like big AK-47s or whatever they carry. So I think that's an interesting thing, at least to me, that at first, when this first happened at the Capitol, is that the National Guard were not sent there at first. And then eventually Pence did call them to come be there. And they were also called there and called to come there without being armed, which I think is a really interesting thing, considering, the experiences that I've had at protests and how much and how many law enforcement are called in and if they're armed and what they're doing, versus what we saw happen at the Capitol, which was largely just Capitol Police at first. So the other thing, that I kind of just want to point out a little bit is that, especially in Kenosha, we see what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse and how he was able to walk around this protest with an AK-47 or whatever gun he had. And in videos, you can see him walking past National Guard or law enforcement and signaling to them with his gun. And he was able to just walk right past them at a protest for a Black man being shot in the back because they thought he might be going in to get a knife. So I think the differences there is pretty astounding, at least to me, in just one single area, one single protest. So the other thing that I think is important to talk about too is what happens afterwards. So the difference between what happens afterwards to the people that are arrested for like breaking curfew, things like that. Curfew is another thing. So when I was in Kenosha, there was a 7:00 curfew, I believe. The Capitol, they had, I believe, a 6:00 curfew, in which there were people still around. I don't completely know if people were arrested for the curfew, but I know for sure people in Kenosha were arrested for the curfew. And from experiences from people that were arrested from the curfew, they were not treated the best when they were there. They were all put in a single room. They weren't given like hardly anything, didn't have access to a bathroom in that specific cell. But then you have, this example of one of the people from the Capitol who was saying that he needed to eat all organic food and was given an all organic diet while being held for his crimes at the Capitol. So I think, it's kind of all the way follows through from the day of the protest, what's happening at the protest to after. There's, all these differences and comparisons that kind of can be made that show you just how different it is for Black Lives Matter protests or social justice issues versus instances like at the Capitol. So since I'm kind of already starting to go into the differences, I'll hand it over to Olivia to get a little bit closer look at some of the differences there.
Yeah, so real quick, I just kind of wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying with your own personal experience and just your history with protests. And I wanted to quick talk about the first time that I ever was a part of a protest wasn't actually for like the Black Lives Matter protest that happened over the summer. The first time I was involved in a protest was for March for Our Lives, if anybody can remember back that far. So that would have been in March of 2018. So back in February 2018 was when the Parkland shooting happened. And during that time, if you were a teacher or a student, it was like a really scary time. And I was substitute teaching in Manitowoc at the time. And I felt like, you know, kids and teachers and school staff shouldn't be afraid of getting shot just for going to school. And this is ridiculous. And so there was a protest in Green Bay, which I went to, and there were hundreds of people there. Like, it was about as big as any of the Black Lives Matter protests that I've been to in the area. But there was a striking difference between the police presence at these protests and the response by people for what I consider to be like similar issues. March for Our Lives was, hey, this is a group of people who, you know, want to feel safe and are afraid of getting killed, and it's you know, about protecting lives. And Black Lives Matter, it's the same sort of thing. But there is this surge of negative response, including from law enforcement for Black Lives Matter, and a lot of weird, just equivocating from people and putting down Black Lives Matter protesters as being violent and as being rioters, where I participated in the March for Our Lives, and that was never the same. That rhetoric was never used with students and teachers. And so now to just kind of go into the Capitol stuff. So there are a lot of, I guess, false equivalencies that have been brought up in regards to, of course, comparisons are going to be drawn between BLM protests and the Capitol. And the thing that I keep saying people say is, oh, how come when, these people storm the Capitol, it's not okay. But when Black Lives Matter has protests over the summer, then that's okay. And I guess a big part of it has to do with the amount of protests that happened over the course of the summer, which there's actually an article that people should check out if you get a chance. It was a analysis that was done by Wall Street Journal. So, not Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. So, I mean, you can take that with a grain of salt, but it is all data analysis. It is not an opinion piece. And they measured, I think it was like 7,300 different protests that happened over the course of the summer to see how many were considered violent, which would include people being injured or killed or property being damaged. And they came to the number that about 97% of the 7,300 protests that took place over the summer for BLM were completely peaceful. Now, where you start to get into the false equivalency stuff is people comparing, this one instance at the Capitol to an entire movement that happened over the course of the summer, and cherry picking instances of police violence or instances of people coming in and saluting and rioting. But the roots and the basis of why these events occurred are very vastly different. When it comes to Black Lives Matter and, drawing back to March for Our Lives, the point of these different demonstrations is all that people don't feel safe. They feel like their human rights are either are being taken away from them, or they're not being treated as equal and as human. And people are tired of feeling less than human. Whereas, what was the point of the riot at the Capitol? Most of the people who were there were trying to start a riot. We're not happy with election results, with our democratic process. And those two things are not equivocable. You can't equate, people desiring to be treated as human with my guy lost the election and I'm mad about it. Those things just don't, you can't compare them. So going through the past, what has it been, like 9 days, and seeing that repeated over and over again, and people using like whataboutism and all these different propaganda sort of tactics to try to divert the conversation, it's been super tiring. And what's incredible, like what's frustrating is that if you try to explain this stuff to some people, they just don't want to listen. But I think it is important to, education is one of the things that we do with LUV. So I think it's important to just keep having these conversations with people and talking to them about this stuff. And so when I talk about this stuff with other people, I do bring up March for Our Lives, because I'm like, well, what's really the root difference between this and the stuff, the marching I did for Black Lives Matter? So I don't know if anybody has any questions about any of the stuff I just talked about. I know I kind of rambled for a bit.
We loved it. I have no complaints about the rambling. I don't see any questions from our viewers at this time, but as we continue, don't forget to leave questions or comments in the comment section, and we'll get to them as we go. So I don't know, Olivia, if this is a good jumping off point to get into that that little presentation slideshow.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
got.
So I guess to sort of segue here, some of the people that I have talked to, and unfortunately it's including like family members who I've tried to speak to, have been like, oh, well, I haven't been following the Capitol stuff because I heard it was just Antifa. And oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm going to try to not get emotional about this, but one of the things that I want people to be aware of is that just because you see something on the internet does not mean it is true or that it is proof. It's very important to do research. And I know that's hard for some people because it takes time and it puts the onus on you, instead of relying on somebody to just be honest and give you truthful information. But I wanted to just sort of give some examples and touch on some of the like evidence people have been putting out there to try to prove that, oh, well, this is all an Antifa hoax. So Kevin, if you want to bring up some of these pictures. So for example, this was an image that was floating around on Facebook that I saw, where they're trying to they're trying to show that, oh, well, these two men in this picture, they're pictured on this Antifa website, and they show the link. And all of the comments that I saw from people were, oh my goodness, they must be Antifa then. But I actually went to that website and I scrolled through it, and it took me about 5 minutes to find this picture. So Kevin, if you want to go to the next slide, this is an Antifa call-out blog where they post pictures of known like Proud Boys, neo-Nazis, people who belong to fascist groups. And this was a blog post from September 2018. And so if we go to the next slides and we just look at some of these pictures, so you can see it's the same guy. This particular call-out blog was talking about this guy, Jason Tankersley. And Kevin, if you go one more slide, this is the exact picture that is being spread around, but it is cut out of context and being spread to try to trick people into like having that gotcha moment, like, see, it is Antifa. Another example, going off of that similar photo, people were saying that the guy in this photo has a hammer and sickle tattoo, so he must be Antifa. But I recognized that tattoo. It's actually from a video game.
Olivia
to
was
the next?
particularly proud about what's coming up
Yes.
next. So.
Okay. So Kevin, if you want to show, okay, I'm going to show that I'm a little bit of a nerd here. This is the symbol of the outsider. Ooh, it's from a video game called Dishonored, which came out in 2012. And the only reason I know this is because it is one of the things that got me through college. And I can prove it's a real game. Kevin, if you want to show the box art, there you go. It's from Dishonored. It's a real video game. So that one, when I saw that picture show up in my feed, I was shocked, and I was like, "Are people really believing this?" It's a video game tattoo. And then the last one I just want to talk about quick is, I think everybody has seen this guy. Is this guy with the horns, and he calls himself a shaman. So this was circulating where people were saying, oh, he was at the Capitol, but also, did you know he was at a BLM rally? I wonder who's responsible for this. Well, you might notice in that left picture that he is holding a sign that's cut off. If we look at another picture from that same rally, you can see it says Q sent me. Because this guy is a QAnon conspiracy theorist, and he actually has an entire Wikipedia page where you can read about everything that he's been up to. So he's known as the QAnon shaman or the Yellowstone wolf. And he has been doing this for a long time, actually. So he's been doing this shaman bit in rallies since 2019, and that specific photo that's going around is from a Phoenix Black Lives Matter protest, but he was there as a counter protester who was there to share the QAnon conspiracy theory. So I want to point out that all of this research I did on my own, and it took me less than 15 minutes to find all of this. So please, 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 if you see people sharing any of this conspiracy theory stuff, you need to help them do the research and show them, hey, you really need to look into this stuff before just believing it off of a Facebook post that somebody shared with you. And sadly, it might not always work. I took those screenshots from that Antifa website, the call out blog, and shared them with somebody. And their response to me was just to say, well, I got my information from a reputable news source. Where did you get your information? And people were incredulous because they were like, dude, she went to the website that's in the picture. But, this person wasn't going to budge on anything. And that can be super frustrating. But with some of them, like the mentality some people have where it's hard for them to believe some of this stuff. Just because on the surface level, it seems like they don't believe it. It could just be trying to save face, sort of, because, I don't ever want to look stupid in front of people. Nobody does. But just know that even like if on, externally, it doesn't seem like there's an effect. As long as you keep having these conversations and showing people like, this is the information I found and I have evidence to back it up. After a while, you'll start to see a difference, and people might come around and be like, oh, maybe I don't have my information right. And that's really the best you can do. And I really hope that through doing all of this, like just education and stuff, we can maybe help people learn to be better critical thinkers. And Julia is saying that your friendly neighborhood librarians can help with research and finding verified sources, which is true. The library is still open, even if some people say it's not, and you can get resources from them right now. So if you want to do research on any of this stuff, you can visit the library's website, or you can call them, and they will be glad to help you out. Hooray!
Yeah,
Just want to clarify that the library itself is not open to the public, but they still allow you to check out books and are still able to help you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I should have clarified that. You can't go in, but you can still get stuff from them.
Yes.
So, yeah. I don't know. I know like I said before, I kind of rambled a bit. I don't know if anybody had any questions about any of the research that I did, or maybe about how to talk to people like friends or family members about this kind of stuff, because I know those conversations can be hard. And like I said, it can be really easy to get frustrated and kind of give up. So yeah, if anybody has any questions.
I have a question that it's a little bit too long for me to just pop up onto the screen, but I'm going to try to summarize this as best I can, Patrick, so please let me know if I'm getting to the point. But anyway, there was a question about protesting, like, the system versus protesting the people who are protesting the protest of the system. Does that make sense? And why?
Okay.
It's why it's is there an equivalency there between what we're seeing at the Capitol? Are those two different things? Why are we putting more emphasis on one over the other? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Would you mean like equivocating between? I guess just to clarify, would that be like a counter protester showing up at like a BLM protest with like a "Back the Blue" sign? Is that sort of where we're going?
I think that's kind of the road going down, if I'm not mistaken.
I can see. Sorry, Kevin. I
go
can
ahead,
see
Sonia.
Patrick's comment, but I think it cuts off because he says, "Why is there no equivalence?" And then it's ... So I might not be able to see the full.
Yeah, and I was
question,
looking at it on the Facebook, so that's why I was trying to surmise it as best I could.
Okay. Well, I could read out, what I can see, and we could maybe go from there. So he said the first time I was part of a protest was against the war post 9/11. 6 marches, as there is now, there's always a portion of each crowd that incites greater actions than the cause itself, good or bad. The dynamic of the crowd, the history or recent actions of protesters for the cause that is being protested, along with the now unfettered access to social media and instant news, greatly contributes to stigma and actions against certain protests. And then, why is there no equivalency? Is that how it might end?
Yeah, so this is the rest of the comment. Sorry, Patrick, we're not trying to put you on blast or anything, but we can't see the full comment in our dashboard, so this is just what's happening. But the rest of the comment reads like this: Why is there no equivalent regarding BLM and groups' opinions regarding rights to vote or a dramatic change to the current system? I ask because despite the basis of each premise being different, the passion can be the same. Acting out or marching against a political system that also hasn't listened to the protests of BLM is close to the same, correct? Sorry for the rambling. I respect and love love people voicing and using this amazing platform. You are doing great. Well, thank you for the compliment, Patrick. But does the rest of his comment make sense?
Yeah. So I do think that it is important to keep in mind that the people who were rioting at the Capitol shouldn't be written off, because they are US citizens and they have their right to protest, and clearly they have a reason to be upset. And you need to, because we talk about empathy and looking at things from other people's perspectives. And while I'm you cannot equivocate, my guy lost the election to like, we're afraid for our lives. There's also, you have to think about what does this election mean to these people. And a lot of people that were in that crowd are probably people who, they've been affected by COVID like everybody else. They're poor, probably have lost their jobs. I'm not saying everybody in that crowd was like that, but these people have anger that's coming from somewhere. And I do believe that, similarly to how with Black Lives Matter, people, are talking about like, hey, we're being treated lesser, and we're being killed just for, the color of our skin and stuff like that. There's probably a sense in the writers at the Capitol, like, well, if these people can, have a demonstration because, their lives are hard, why can't I also do that? Because my life is hard. And I think that one of the things that's and this is coming from somebody who had trouble like grasping this at first until like I really saw, honestly, until I saw the video of George Floyd at the beginning of the summer. And the thing that I had trouble grasping was the concept of white privilege. And I think that can be really, really difficult for people to get, especially if you're white, but you're like living in poverty, or, you have other aspects of your life where you're suffering. And so when you hear about the concept of like white privilege, your gut reaction is to kind of go on the defensive and be like, well, my life is difficult too. Like, why do these people think that they're special? And so that's the idea of you've never had to be afraid for your life because of the color of your skin is difficult to grasp. But like, I think that, again, with education and just trying to get through to people, you can do it. I feel like that's the only reason I'm here, like, because I used to, I think, be a little bit a little high and mighty and think like, oh, I'm a good person and like I get all of this stuff. But like, it wasn't until more recently that I was like, oh no, I have a lot I still need to learn. So I feel like, sorry, I was just gonna say, I feel like I've gone off a little bit. But I'm just trying to talk about like, where that anger comes from and that passion comes from, and how it's a difficult subject to kind of talk about because of it.
Yeah. And just kind of springboarding off you, Olivia, a little bit, because we as an organization have been dealing with this in one way or another. They're in the eyes of the law, in our inalienable rights, we have a right to be upset about anything and are able to voice that anger about anything. But sometimes the reason we're upset is not that big a deal. Or it doesn't come from a place that betters the world as a whole, or rather it serves our own self purpose. And I think that I don't want to call it out specifically, but we see it driving along the lake. If you're driving between two rivers of Manitowoc, let me just put it that way. And everyone has the right to voice their own opinions and be upset in those opinions, but then we have to think about why are we upset? Is it because it hurts my own voice, or is it because it hurts the voices of those around me? And kind of taking that perspective in is really hard, and for some people to do, and even for me sometimes, who I think myself to be a very empathetic person, sometimes that can be difficult for me to grasp too. So sometimes you have to take that step back and put the focus on the greater good, which I think is the direction that we as a community and as a world and as a nation kind of need to go. That's where we need to head.
I just want to say on kind of piggybacking off of that too, and Olivia, in response to the question from Patrick, you know, for I guess for me too, I just think it's not really the fact of necessarily like that they were protesting or that they what they were protesting for. So I could honestly care less if they're protesting for that. It's the fact of they if it were Black Lives Matter, if it were immigrant rights, if it were any other people of color protesting, they wouldn't have even gotten near that Capitol. There would have been no chance of them getting near that Capitol. Just because, you know, like I was telling about my own experience being at protests where there was no violence to begin with. There was never any violence. It was completely peaceful the whole time, or organized by organizations that are always peaceful or have always been peaceful. And there's still a massive police presence. And I think that's the thing that I'm angry about, is that, you know, you look at, like for me, I have experience being around all these police, being around armed National Guard, and being a peaceful protester, and then looking at you know, the crowd that was at the Capitol and being like, okay, why did they only have Capitol Police there? If they knew that there was going to be protests and there was maybe a possibility of more than it becoming more than a protest, why was it okay for it to just be the Capitol Police, you know, as opposed to other types of protests? So I think that's really the focus of the anger, at least for me, and I know for a lot of other people too. It's not about them protesting and using their voice and using their right to protest. It's about them making it further because they were, I mean, you can see it in the videos. They were let in by Capitol Police. They were taking selfies with Capitol Police. They, you know, and not every Capitol Police, as we can see, and I do want to shout out the one police officer, you know, that saved a lot of the Senate or the Congress people by diverting a group of protesters. He obviously is now being, you know, held as a hero, and unfortunately, I don't remember his name. But there were other police officers that you can see in videos. They were just letting people in, and that just does not happen at other types of protests. So
Yeah.
Right, that doesn't sit very well with me either.
I think the thing that I was going to say, the thing that's frustrating about all of it is that there is a lot of hypocrisy from multiple sides, but most of it is in law enforcement and the way we see our government in general handling specific situations. Because when it's Black Lives Matter, that's when it's time to send in the National Guard, and that's when it's a huge problem. But when it is a large, you know, insurrection where the people that were at the Capitol were armed and they had like zip ties and handcuffs, clearly their goal was to get their hands on representatives. But yeah, that's not treated with the same like weight as peaceful protesters just asking to be treated like human beings. There is this just horribly large hypocrisy, and it's because there is such a thing as systemic racism, and there are people that are in power that don't want to change things, and like the status quo is a certain way, and that's the sort of stuff that needs to change in this country, because it's frustrating, and it's infuriating, and it's also tiring, because having to deal with it again and again just after a while, you start to feel so worn down. But I completely understand, Sonia. I was I almost went down to Kenosha, but I got convinced to not go. And so I've only ever been to protests that were peaceful with a small police presence, and I can't imagine what it was like to be there when there was National Guard. That would have been just horrifying. And for what? Because you're walking and, saying Black Lives Matter. That's just insane to have that kind of a show of force like that. So yeah.
Amanda, did you have something?
I was just going to bring up something that, I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I think that is that people are so quick to scream about their rights. Like, this is my right, and, it's my right, my right, my right, my right. And they seem to forget that being a part of a society, yes, you have rights when you are part of society, but that those rights come with responsibility. And I feel like people continue to forget that they have a responsibility to participate in a society, to enjoy the benefits of it. And I think that for me is the biggest difference I see with the attack on the Capitol versus protests and demonstrations, is that they think they have the right to storm the Capitol building and threaten lives of our elected representatives. That is just mind-blowing. Like, you can't say that you're defending freedom and defending this country when you are just so straightforward attacking it. I don't think that there could be more of an obvious attack on democracy and the things that this country was founded on, that people have garnered all of their rights from. I think that's all.
Well, and going off of that too, Amanda, I think that there's been like our idea of democracy has kind of been diluted over time, especially over these last 4-ish years or so, that I think it would do us all a benefit, similar to what you did, by being more involved civically, to kind of dive back into what our democracy really means, and what it owes us, but also conversely what we owe it.
Ah, yes. Ask not what your country can do for you.
Yeah.
I think that, that is the thing too, is like, if people are really concerned about, this country turning into a terrible place, like threatening Capitol officers and barging down doors and, just, defecating on the floor of the Capitol building, for instance. Like, that's not going to fix anything. That's not going to make this place less terrible. Like, I feel like if you really were concerned about the integrity of our country and our government and our communities, that you would get out and do something. Like, we want that sense of community back, and we can't have it if we're just, going straight to violence and straight to arguments. And I think that is where the education comes in, is just like, you can't just make all of your decisions based off of emotion without getting all of the facts first.
And going off of that, I think, I can't remember the phrase exactly. So I'm going to pretend that I didn't mean to bring up a phrase at all. But I've seen a lot of but I've seen a few comments talking about taking the emotions out of the facts. And I think that's important, of course, to an extent. But I do think that that's important, like an important thought to bring into the education, specifically having conversations with people who don't necessarily see eye to eye with you, because it does at a certain point become just two people screaming at each other and no one's really listening. And I know that we've talked about that before as a group, but I wanted to bring that up because there was a question from someone. How do we move people in Manitowoc that may have a different opinion toward our point of view? And I do want to say that our point of view might not be. I don't think it's a singular point. I think that there has to be some roadblocks, or not roadblocks, some benchmarks in between, where people can take rests and, you know, consolidate thoughts and learn. But I think this might be a good place to kind of wind down, because I think this is a really good way to bring this back out into the community. So what are your ways of talking to people, or bringing out your point of views with people?
So I can kind of go off of this. I just want to say that I think there's a lot of different approaches to this, and there's different things that are going to work for different people. But the way that I feel that tends to work best is talking to people that we know, people that trust us, or maybe if they're family or if they're friends, and they have different viewpoints, having a conversation with them that, even though it might be awkward and difficult for you, it gets easier the more that you do it. I know, like, I've had conversations with people that were completely like, it was weird because I was like, it feels weird to call this person out. But it definitely, like, as you get more into it, it gets easier. But I think, talking to people that are going to be somewhat approachable, that have a different view to you, I think is key, because they already have some openness to having that conversation. And that way it's not just a debate. It's not somebody you don't know. It's not somebody that, is either coming at you aggressively or you coming at them aggressively. I don't think that approach really helps anybody. So no matter what, trying to have a civil conversation, I think, is the best. The other end might not always be civil, but trying not to, go at people with inflammatory remarks, like even about, say you're talking about one representative that or whatever, and they're telling you that they love this representative, and then you're like, well, this representative is blah 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 blah. Coming at them with facts and with research and with knowledge, without degrading them or the people that they're supporting, in like a name calling way or things like that. I really think civil conversations are the way to go, and with people, so that they get an understanding that, okay, well, this person that I care about thinks this way, and this is why they think this way. Maybe you have experiences that directly affect you. If you're a person of color that's living in this country right now, you can perhaps share your experiences as a person of color and give them, that knowledge of the difference that they might not see.
To go off of what you were saying, Sonia, some things that are important to remember, especially if you're talking to like a loved one, a friend, somebody that you know personally, is that you don't want to start a fight with them, and you don't want to leave. You don't want to just leave, right? Because the worst thing you can do for somebody whose opinion you're trying to bring around to your point of view, is that if it does end up in just a shouting match and you decide, well, whatever, that's how you feel and I'm done talking to you, that is the worst thing you can do for that person, because that'll just reinforce the idea of, oh, well, you know, nobody, I'm the only one who believes this, nobody cares about what I think, and then you just grasp more onto that part of your identity. And that's an important thing to remember, is that especially like with your morals and your political beliefs, these are deeply ingrained in people's personalities and is really, really important to people. So it can be difficult to try to change somebody's viewpoint or opinion because it's so tied to who they are. But that's why when you are talking to somebody about this stuff, when you ask them questions about how they feel about things, it's good to keep asking them questions, because then you're encouraging some like more critical thinking on their part. So yeah, if somebody does say to you like, well, I believe that Antifa were the ones who were behind what happened at the Capitol, then you show interest in what they're saying. Even if you don't agree with what they're saying, show interest and ask questions like, oh, show me the sources you got from that. Where did this picture come from? Keep asking questions, because the more onus you put on that person to give you with the burden of proof, the more they'll start to think about why they believe certain things and whether or not that holds up. And if you show interest you're showing interest in something that person cares about. And it can be really hard to change your point of view on something that you care so deeply about. So having those conversations, asking questions, and if somebody does start to have kind of a crisis of character because they do start to see a different side, and you'll panic because you won't know what to do, because it's like, well, I believed this for so long. You need to try to be there for that person, and it's really difficult, and you need a lot of patience, and it might take a long time, but I think it's worth it, especially if it's somebody you really care about. Yep.
Beautiful. A little education, understanding, and love. Maybe that's our mission statement. It's definitely our mission statement.
It's our mission statement, yeah.
What?
Well, I know, right? We have a mission statement.
Oh my gosh.
It's like a full 360 we just did.
What a treat. It's nice when things like this work out as organically as they did. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add before we wrap it up? No?
I don't think so.
I feel like I've talked a lot.
You know what, Olivia? I always like listening to you talk.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And thanks, Olivia and Amanda, for carving out their evening to be here. And thank you, Sonia, for being so eloquent and kind of road mapping our evening. Before we let you go, we have social medias. So follow us on the social medias. I'm going to throw them up on the thing. Sorry, it's covering Olivia's face, but I don't know how to fix that. There we are. So follow us on Facebook, on Instagram at Lakeshore's United Visionaries, and then on Twitter at Love Manitowoc. So you can follow us on all of those. You can also, if you feel so inclined, donate to our mission. You can donate by cash or check to the to First Presbyterian Church, who is our umbrella. So you can send it to address, or you can also now donate to us virtually on the lines. So you can head to our website, lakeshoresunitedvisionaries.org/donate, and then you can donate to us there. And you'll find out a little bit more about our wish list and some things that we've got planned. You can check out Sonia's painting that she had some help with from these two lovely ladies down below me at the public library for MLK Day, which is coming up this Monday. And also, check out our website for our I Have a Dream contest, where you can submit your dream for a better Manitowoc and then work with Lakeshore's United Visionaries one-on-one so we can help make that dream come true for our Lakeshore. I'm so happy that you guys are here. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Hey,
Kevin.
thank you.
Kevin.
Love you guys. See what I did there? Hey.
Oh.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.